Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another sedate and late Purblind Gamer stream. I hope you all are having a good week thus far. It's only Monday, so it hasn't had the chance to get that crazy. Heck, even at my job it hasn't gotten that crazy yet. Hey, how's the mic? Welcome in. How are you doing? And you guys should also go check out House of Mike and see what he's streaming. Ah yes, Cuphead. I know I said I would do another bonus stream of me reading The King in Yellow, also to make up for the short horror Saturday stream I missed the other week. And because I want to keep reading this book and, finish in the next few weeks. Really have been enjoying it. And then, I don't know, to what degree we'll make it a regular thing, or what I'll do more next year. Maybe I'll do another book next year, just because. Yeah, I don't want to overcommit myself and be doing too many. Nice Cuphead emotes. And I enjoy the audiobooks, and I feel like it's good practice for something I could theoretically do as a part-time job at some point. But as I think, I don't know. Maybe the games are more fun. And I do plenty of reading at work and stuff anyway. Thank you to everybody who came out to my last couple streams. We did more Hardline last night, and we did Penumbra, the tech demo for Short Horror Saturday. And yeah, I'm thinking I'll try and finish Hardline on Sunday, but I don't. Because if it keeps getting harder at the same rate of difficulty increase that it has been, I don't know if I'll actually be able to beat it. But who knows? And yeah, not many announcements. Just ordinary, dull life, and me not being able to talk about much that I do at work. Because it's not top secret, but it's secret. Important distinction. So, yeah, I realized last King in Yellow stream I read the 5th story at the end, but I was so exhausted. I was practically asleep when I read it. I became very tired very quickly, so I'll start by redoing that and then move on to the next one. And these ones both seem a bit shorter than. Now, the stories in this book vary a great deal based on length. And King in Yellow is a novel from the a collection of short stories from the 1890s that's considered a horror, weird fiction, and cosmic horror. And some of the stories are interconnected, share characters or refer to other stories. And it also, there's this play called The King in Yellow, which some of the characters read, which has a disturbing effect on the mind. It's very shocking and can make people go mad. And there's also this immensely powerful entity, almost godlike, called the King in Yellow, who lives in another realm and seems to have malignant intent. And this is set in the 1920s, but since it was written in the 1890s, it's a very different version of the 1920s. I'll go ahead and get started. And as usual, I've turned off channel points redemptions for this stream. So, thank you to everybody who contributed and helped us reach the community challenge goal. And I've turned off text to speech, so I won't really be responding. I'll respond to chat and catch up after I finish a story or a chapter. I spill water all over myself. ASMR reading time of disturbing horror. Not disturbing Victorian horror, though, so maybe that's less disturbing than if I were reading the screenplay from A Nightmare on Elm Street. I wouldn't presume to know. The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers. The Demoiselle d'Is. Mais je crois que je suis descendu en prise, ténébreux en quel 18. Heraclitus estre verite cachée. There be 3 things which are too wonderful for me, yea, 4 which I know not. The way of an eagle in the air, the way of a serpent upon a rock, the way of a ship in the midst of the sea, and the way of a man with a maid. 1. The utter desolation of the scene began to have its effect. I sat down to face the situation and, if possible, recall to mind some landmark which might aid me in extricating myself from my present position. If I could only find the ocean again, all would be clear, for I knew one could see the island of Goa from the cliffs. I laid down my gun and, kneeling behind a rock, lighted a pipe. Then I looked at my watch. It was nearly 4 o'clock. I might have wandered far from Kerselec since daybreak. Standing the day before on the cliffs below Kerselec with Gulvan, looking out over the sombre moors among which I had now lost my way, these downs had appeared to me level as a meadow, stretching to the horizon, and although I knew how deceptive is distance, I could not realize that what from Kerselec seemed to be mere grassy hollows were great valleys covered with gorse and heather, and what looked like scattered boulders were in reality enormous cliffs of granite. "It's a bad place for a stranger," old Gulven had said. "You'd better take a guide," and I had replied, "I shall not lose myself." Now I knew that I had lost myself as I sat there smoking, with the sea wind blowing in my face. On every side stretched the moorland, covered with flowering gorse and heath and granite boulders. There was not a tree in sight, much less a house. After a while I picked up the gun, and turning my back on the sun, tramped on again. There was little use in following any of the brawling streams which every now and then crossed my path, for, instead of flowing into the sea, they ran inland to reedy pools in the hollows of the moors. I had followed several, but they all led me to swamps or silent little ponds from which the snipe rose peeping and wheeled away in an ecstasy of fright. I began to feel fatigued, and the gun galled my shoulder in spite of the double pads. The sun sank lower and lower, shining level across the yellow gorse and the moorland pools. As I walked, my own gigantic shadow led me on, seeming to lengthen at every step. The gorse scraped against my leggings, crackled beneath my feet, showering the brown earth with blossoms, and the brake bowed and billowed along my path. From tufts of heath rabbits scurried away through the bracken, and among the swamp grass I heard the wild duck's drowsy quack. Once a fox stole across my path, and again, as I stopped to drink at a hurrying rill, a heron flapped heavily from the reeds beside me. I turned to look at the sun. It seemed to touch the edges of the plain. When at last I decided that it was useless to go on, and that I must make up my mind to spend at least one night on the moors, I threw myself down, thoroughly fagged out. The evening sunlight slanted warm across my body, but the sea winds began to rise, and I felt a chill strike through me from my wet shooting boots. High overhead, gulls were wheeling and tossing like bits of white paper. From some distant marsh a solitary curlew called. Little by little the sun sank into the plain, and the zenith flushed with the afterglow. I watched the sky change from palest gold to pink, and then to smoldering fire. Clouds of midges danced above me, and high in the calm air a bat dipped and soared. My eyelids began to droop. Then, as I shook off the drowsiness, a sudden crash among the bracken roused me. I raised my eyes. A great bird hung quivering in the air above my face. For an instant I stared, incapable of motion. Then something leaped past me in the ferns, and the bird rose, wheeled, and pitched headlong into the brake. I was on my feet in an instant, peering through the gorse. There came the sound of a struggle from a bunch of heather close by, and then all was quiet. I stepped forward, my gun poised, but when I came to the heather, the gun fell under my arm again, and I stood motionless in silent astonishment. A dead hare lay on the ground, and on the hare stood a magnificent falcon, one talon buried in the creature's neck, the other planted firmly on its limp flank. But what astonished me was not the mere sight of a falcon sitting upon its prey. I had seen that more than once. It was that the falcon was fitted with a sort of leash about both talons, and from the leash hung a round bit of metal like a sleigh bell. The bird turned its fierce yellow eyes on me, and then stooped and struck its curved beak into the quarry. At the same instant hurried steps sounded among the heather, and a girl sprang into the covert in front. Without a glance at me, she walked up to the falcon, and passing her gloved hand under its breast, raised it from the quarry. Then she deftly slipped a small hood over the bird's head, and holding it out on her gauntlet, stopped and picked up the hare. She passed a cord about the animal's legs, and fastened the end of the thong to her girdle. Then she started to retrace her steps through the covert. As she passed me, I raised my cap, and she acknowledged my presence with a scarcely perceptible inclination. I had been so astonished, so lost in admiration of the scene before my eyes, that it had not occurred to me that here was my salvation. But as she moved away, I recollected that unless I wanted to sleep on a windy moor that night, I had better recover my speech without delay. At my first word she hesitated, and as I stepped before her, I thought a look of fear came into her beautiful eyes. But as I humbly explained my unpleasant plight, her face flushed, and she looked at me in wonder. "Surely you did not come from Kerselec," she repeated. Her sweet voice had no trace of the Breton accent, nor of any accent which I knew, and yet there was something in it I seemed to have heard before, something quaint and indefinable, like the theme of an old song. I explained that I was an American, unacquainted with Finistère, shooting there for my own amusement. "An American," she repeated in the same quaint musical tones. "I have never before seen an American." For a moment she stood silent. Then, looking at me, she said, "If you should walk all night, you could not reach Kerselec now, even if you had a guide." This was pleasant news. "But," I began, if I could only find a peasant's hut where I might get something to eat and shelter. The falcon on her wrist fluttered and shook its head. The girl smoothed its glossy back and glanced at me. "Look around," she said gently. "Can you see the end of these moors? Look, north, south, east, west. Can you see anything but moorland and bracken?" "No," I said. "The moor is wild and desolate. It is easy to enter, but sometimes they who enter never leave it. There are no peasants' huts here." "Well," I said, "if you will tell me in which direction Kerselec lies, tomorrow it will take me no longer to go back than it has to come." She looked at me again with an expression almost like pity. "Ah," she said, "to come is easy and takes hours. To go is different and may take centuries." I stared at her in amazement, but decided that I had misunderstood her. Then, before I had time to speak, she drew a whistle from her belt and sounded it. "Sit down and rest," she said to me. "You have come a long distance and are tired." She gathered up her pleated skirts, and motioning me to follow, picked her dainty way through the gorse to a flat rock among the ferns. They will be here directly," she said, and taking a seat at one end of the rock, invited me to sit down on the other edge. The afterglow was beginning to fade in the sky, and a single star twinkled faintly through the rosy haze. A long, wavering triangle of waterfowl drifted southward over our heads, and from the swamps around the plover were calling. "They are very beautiful, these moors," she said quietly. "Beautiful, but cruel to strangers," I answered. "Beautiful and cruel," she repeated dreamily. "Beautiful and cruel." "Like a woman," I said stupidly. "Oh," she cried, with a little catch in her breath, and looked at me. Her dark eyes met mine, and I thought she seemed angry or frightened. "Like a woman," she repeated under her breath. "How cruel to say so." Then, after a pause, as though speaking aloud to herself, "How cruel for him to say that." I don't know what sort of an apology I offered for my inane, though harmless, speech, but I know that she seemed so troubled about it that I began to think I had said something very dreadful without knowing it, and remembered with horror the pitfalls and snares which the French language sets for foreigners. While I was trying to imagine what I might have said, a sound of voices came across the moor, and the girl rose to her feet. "No," she said, with a trace of a smile on her pale face. "I will not accept your apologies, monsieur, but I must prove you wrong, and that shall be my revenge. Look, here come Hastur and Raoul." Two men loomed up in the twilight. One had a sack across his shoulders, and the other carried a hoop before him as a waiter carries a tray. The hoop was fastened with straps to his shoulders, and around the edge of the circle sat 3 hooded falcons fitted with tinkling bells. The girl stepped up to the falconer, and with a quick turn of her wrist transferred her falcon to the hoop, where it quickly sidled off and nestled among its mates, who shook their hooded heads and ruffled their feathers till the belled jesses tinkled again. The other man stepped forward and, bowing respectfully, took up the hare and dropped it into the game sack. "These are my piqueurs," said the girl, turning to me with a gentle dignity. "Raoul is a good falconer, and I shall some day make him grand veigneur. Hastur is incomparable." The 2 silent men saluted me respectfully. Did I not tell you, monsieur, that I should prove you wrong? She continued. This, then, is my revenge, that you do me the courtesy of accepting food and shelter at my own house. Before I could answer, she spoke to the falconers, who stared intently across the heath, and with a gracious gesture to me she followed. I don't know whether I made her understand how profoundly grateful I felt, but she seemed pleased to listen as we walked over the dewy heather. "Are you not very tired?" she asked. I had clean forgotten my fatigue in her presence, and I told her so. "Don't you think your gallantry is a little old-fashioned?" she said, and when I looked confused and humbled, she added quietly, "Oh, I like it. I like everything old-fashioned, and it is delightful to hear you say such pretty things." The moorland around us was very still now under its ghostly sheet of mist. The plovers had ceased their calling. The crickets and all the little creatures of the fields were silent as we passed, and yet it seemed to me as if I could hear them beginning again far behind us. Well in advance, the two tall falconers strode across the heather, and the faint jingling of the hawks' bells came to our ears in distant murmuring chimes. Suddenly a splendid hound dashed out of the mist in front, followed by another and another, until a half-dozen or more were bounding and leaping around the girl beside me. She caressed and quieted them with her gloved hand, speaking to them in quaint terms, which I remembered to have seen in old French manuscripts. Then the falcons on the circlet borne by the falconer ahead began to beat their wings and scream, and from somewhere out of sight the notes of a hunting horn floated across the moor. The hounds sprang away before us and vanished in the twilight. The falcons flapped and squealed upon their perch, and the girl, taking up the song of the horn, began to hum. Clear and mellow her voice sounded in the night air. Chasseur, chasseur, chassez encore, quittez rosette et genton, ton ton, ton ton, ton ten, ton ton, ou pour rabattre de l'aurore, que l'amour soit de planton. Ton ton, ton ten, ton ton. As I listened to her lovely voice, a grey mass, which rapidly grew more distinct, loomed up in front, and the horn rang out joyously through the tumult of the hounds and falcons. A torch glimmered at a gate, a light streamed through an opening door, and we stepped upon a wooden bridge which trembled under our feet and rose creaking and straining behind us as we passed over the moat and into a small stone court, walled on every side. From an open doorway a man came and, bending in salutation, presented a cup to the girl beside me. She took the cup and touched it with her lips, then lowering it, turned to me and said in a low voice, "I bid you welcome." At that moment one of the falconers came with another cup, but before handing it to me, presented it to the girl, who tasted it. The falconer made a gesture to receive it, but she hesitated a moment, and then, stepping forward, offered me the cup with her own hands. I felt this to be an act of extraordinary graciousness, but hardly knew what was expected of me, and did not raise it to my lips at once. The girl flushed crimson. I saw that I must act quickly. "Mademoiselle," I faltered, "a stranger whom you have saved from dangers he may never realize, empties this cup to the gentlest and loveliest hostess of France." "In his name," she murmured, crossing herself as I drained the cup. Then, stepping into the doorway, she turned to me with a pretty gesture and, taking my hand in hers, led me into the house, saying again and again, "You are very welcome, indeed you are welcome, to the Chateau d'Is." I awoke next morning with the music of the horn in my ears, and leaping out of the ancient bed, went to a curtained window where the sunlight filtered through little deep-set panes. The horn ceased as I looked into the court below. A man who might have been brother to the two falconers of the night before stood in the midst of a pack of hounds. A curved horn was strapped over his back, and in his hand he held a long-lashed whip. The dogs whined and yelped, dancing around him in anticipation. There was the stamp of horses, too, in the walled yard. "Mount!" cried a voice in Breton, and with a clatter of hoofs the two falconers, with falcons upon their wrists, rode into the courtyard among the hounds. Then I heard another voice, which sent the blood throbbing through my heart. "Piriou, Louis, hunt the hounds well, and spare neither spur nor whip. Thou, Raoul, and thou, Gaston, see that the épervier does not prove himself niais, and if it be best, in your judgment, faites courtoisie à l'oiseau, jardiner un oiseau. Like the muet there on Hastur's wrist is not difficult, but thou, Raoul, mayest not find it so simple to govern that haggard. Twice last week he foamed au vif, and lost the becade, although he is used to the lure. The bird acts like a stupid branchier. Patre un haggard n'est pas si facile." Was I dreaming? The old language of falconry which I had read in yellow manuscripts, the old forgotten French of the Middle Ages, was sounding in my ears, while the hounds bayed and the hawks' bells tinkled accompaniment to the stamping horses. She broke again in the sweet forgotten language. She spoke again in the sweet forgotten language. "If you would rather attach the lange and leave that haggard au bloc, Raoul, I shall say nothing, for it were a pity to spoil so fair a day's sport with an ill-trained source. Esime abaisseur. It is possibly the best way. Qu'à lui donnera des reins. I was perhaps hasty with the bird. It takes time to pass à la filière and the exercises d'escape." Then the falconer Raoul bowed in his stirrups and replied, "If it be the pleasure of Mademoiselle, I shall keep the hawk." "It is my wish," she answered. "Falconry I know, but you have yet to give me many a lesson in autorescierie, my poor Raoul. Sieur Piriou Louis mount." The huntsman sprang into an archway, and in an instant returned, mounted upon a strong black horse, followed by a piqueur also mounted. "Ah!" she cried joyously. "Speed, Glemarec René! Speed, speed all! Sound thy horn, Sieur Piriou!" The silvery music of the hunting horn filled the courtyard. The hounds sprang through the gateway, and galloping hoofbeats plunged out of the paved court, loud on the drawbridge, suddenly muffled, then lost in the heather and bracken of the moors. Distant and more distant sounded the horn, until it became so faint that the sudden carol of a soaring lark drowned it in my ears. I heard the voice below responding to some call from within the house.
I do not regret the chase. I will go another time. Courtesy to the stranger, Pelagier, remember." And a feeble voice came quavering from within the house. "Courtoisie." I stripped and rubbed myself from head to foot in the huge earthen basin of icy water which stood upon the stone floor at the foot of my bed. Then I looked about for my clothes. They were gone, but on a settle near the door lay a heap of garments which I inspected with astonishment. As my clothes had vanished, I was compelled to attire myself in the costume which had evidently been placed there for me to wear while my own clothes dried. Everything was there: cap, shoes, and hunting doublet of silvery grey homespun, but the close-fitting costume and seamless shoes belonged to another century, and I remembered the strange costumes of the 3 falconers in the courtyard. I was sure that it was not the modern dress of any portion of France or Brittany, but not until I was dressed and stood before a mirror between the windows did I realize that I was clothed much more like a young huntsman of the Middle Ages than like a Breton of that day. I hesitated and picked up the cap. Should I go down and present myself in that strange guise? There seemed to be no help for it. My own clothes were gone, and there was no bell in the ancient chamber to call a servant, so I contented myself with removing a short hawk's feather from the cap, and, opening the door, went downstairs. By the fireplace in the large room at the foot of the stairs an old Breton woman sat spinning with a distaff. She looked up at me when I appeared, and, smiling frankly, wished me health in the Breton language, to which I laughingly replied in French. At the same moment my hostess appeared and returned my salutation with a grace and dignity that sent a thrill to my heart. Her lovely head, with its dark curly hair, was crowned with a headdress which set all doubts as to the epoch of my own costume at rest. Her slender figure was exquisitely set off in the homespun hunting gown edged with silver, and on her gauntlet-covered wrist she bore one of her petted hawks. With perfect simplicity she took my hand and led me into the garden in the court, and seating herself before a table, invited me very sweetly to sit beside her. Then she asked me, in her soft, quaint accent, how I had passed the night, and whether I was very much inconvenienced by wearing the clothes which old Pelagier had put there for me while I slept. I looked at my own clothes and shoes, drying in the sun by the garden wall, and hated them. What horrors they were compared with the graceful costume which I now wore! I told her this laughing, but she agreed with me very seriously. "We will throw them away," she said in a quiet voice. In my astonishment I attempted to explain that I not only could not think of accepting clothes from anybody, although for all I knew it might be the custom of hospitality in that part of the country, but that I should cut an impossible figure if I returned to France clothed as I then was. She laughed and tossed her pretty head, saying something in old French which I did not understand, and then Pelagier trotted out with a tray on which stood 2 bowls of milk, a loaf of white bread, fruit, a platter of honeycomb, and a flagon of deep red wine. "You see I have not yet broken my fast because I wished you to eat with me, but I am very hungry," she smiled. "I would rather die than forget one word of what you have said," I blurted out, while my cheeks burned. "She will think me mad," I added to myself, but she turned to me with sparkling eyes. "Ah," she murmured, "then monsieur knows all that there is of chivalry." She crossed herself and broke bread. I sat and watched her white hands, not daring to raise my eyes to hers. "Will you not eat?" she asked. Why do you look so troubled? Ah, why? I knew it now. I knew I would give my life to touch with my lips those rosy palms. I understood now that from the moment when I looked into her dark eyes there on the moor last night, I had loved her. My great and sudden passion held me speechless. Are you ill at ease? She asked again. Then, like a man who pronounces his own doom, I answered in a low voice, Yes, I am ill at ease for love of you. And as she did not stir nor answer, the same power moved my lips in spite of me, and I said, I, who am unworthy of the lightest of your thoughts, I, who abuse hospitality and repay your gentle courtesy with bold presumption, I love you. She leaned her head upon her hands and answered softly, I love you. Your words are very dear to me. I love you. Then I shall win you. Win me, she replied. But all this time I had been sitting silent, my face turned toward her. She, also silent, her sweet face resting on her upturned palm, sat facing me, and as her eyes looked into mine, I knew that neither she nor I had spoken human speech. But I knew that her soul had answered mine, and I drew myself up, feeling youth and joyous love coursing through my every vein. She, with a bright color in her lovely face, seemed as one awakened from a dream, and her eyes sought mine with a questioning glance which made me tremble with delight. We broke our fast. Speaking of ourselves, I told her my name, and she told me hers, the Demoiselle Jean d'Ys. She spoke of her father and mother's death, and how the 19 of her years had been passed in the little fortified farm along with her. She spoke of her father and mother's death, and how the 19 of her years had been passed in the little fortified farm along with her nurse,
Streamer, game on stream. Streamer, I'm afraid. Streamer, you must pause my stream. Streamer got a raid. Here's a raider leading raiders. Welcome raider, welcome raiders. Are the raiders alligators? Raider, grackle. We just got a raid. Hello, Cylon by the Sea. Welcome in. How are you doing tonight? You guys should check out Cylon by the Sea. What have you been playing tonight? More extremely gory horror games? Oh, thanks. I'm glad you like the raid song. Welcome in, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Purblind Gamer. I'm a legally blind retro and variety streamer who does a lot of obscure games and also has a particular fondness for horror. So, right now I'm reading The King in Yellow, which is a horror/weird fiction book from the late 1800s, which was very influential on H.P. Lovecraft, and has so far been quite interesting. Some of the stories are scarier than others. I think, done with violent games for now. And hey, Dragon of the West, welcome in. See you, and I might as well catch up on chat. Oh, I appreciate the lurk. And hey, Cringe Defender. I think you came in right after I started. We didn't finish Hardline last night, but we probably will. Maybe we'll finish it next Sunday if I'm able to finish that game. And what were you playing tonight, Cylon? I mostly play games here. The reading is something kind of new. I just tried it out and then decided I might as well keep going, trying to finish this book over the course of a few streams. It really is pretty interesting. I don't know if any of you have heard of The King in Yellow. Lovecraft kind of incorporated some of it into his writing, and some of the names as well. You're playing 1954 Alcatraz, point and click adventure. I don't know that one. That sounds like an interesting setting. Yeah, have you been enjoying it? But yes, I mostly stream mostly two games, a mixture of adventure and action, and a lot of retro games, some shooters. I try and mix it up. A game called The Prince in Yellow. I don't know that one, Cylon. I might. Is it all? I wonder if it's inspired by The King in Yellow. Is it a kind of horror themed? Because the way I'd read about this book years before, but then I happened to play a game for Short Horror Saturday called The Baby in Yellow, which is an amazing game if you like horror. I definitely recommend it. Real weird stuff. And that kind of, and then, since I've been meaning to read The King in Yellow for years, that prompted me to get a large print copy of the book, and then try reading it on the stream, just, as a sort of experiment. Oh, maybe it was The Baby in Yellow? Might have. I don't know. I just found it on Itch, and it was already quite popular. Maybe they did change the name. It's still but it's a full game, fairly short, but still, a complete game, and one I definitely recommend to anyone who will listen. Yeah, exactly. Everybody loves creepy demon babies. More so when the diaper comes to life. There's a portal to the cat's realm in the attic. Did I mention that game was weird? Right now we're reading the Demoiselle d'Is, which is the 5th story in The King in Yellow, and it's about a man who is out on the moors of Brittany and finds himself appears to be transported back in time to this this grand house owned by a young woman who has been out hunting. And where we were, he had just declared his love for her, even though they had only just met. Oh, can't stay. Hey, no worries, Cylon. Always great to see you here, and I need to catch one of your streams soon. I hope you have a good night, and really appreciate the raid. I told her my name, and she told me hers, the Demoiselle Jean d'Is. She spoke of her father and mother's death, and how 19 of her years had been passed in the little fortified farm, alone with her nurse Pelagie. Alone with her nurse Pelagie, Glemarec René the Piqueur, and the 4 falconers, Raoul, Gaston, Hastur, and the Sieur Piriou Louis, who had served her father. She had never been outside the moorland, never even had seen a human soul before, except the falconers and Pelagie. She did not know how she had heard of Kerselec,
Perhaps the falconers had spoken of it. She knew the legends of Loup Garou and Jean la Flamme from her nurse Pelagier. She embroidered and spun flax. Her hawks and hounds were her only distraction. When she had met me there on the moor, she had been so frightened that she had almost dropped at the sound of my voice. She had, it was true, seen ships at sea from the cliffs, but as far as the eye could reach, the moors over which she galloped were destitute of any sign of human life. There was a legend which old Pelagier told, how anybody once lost in the unexplored moorland might never return, because the moors were enchanted. She did not know whether it was true. She never had thought about it until she met me. She did not know whether the falconers had ever been outside, or whether they could go if they would. The books in the house which Pelagier, the nurse, had taught her to read were hundreds of years old. All this she told me with a sweet seriousness seldom seen in anyone but children. My own name she found easy to pronounce, and insisted, because my first name was Philip, I must have French blood in me. She did not seem curious to learn anything about the outside world, and I thought perhaps she considered it had forfeited her interest and respect from the stories of her nurse. We were still sitting at the table, and she was throwing grapes to the small field birds which came fearlessly to our very feet. I began to speak in a vague way of going, but she would not hear of it, and before I knew it I had promised to stay a week and hunt with hawk and hound in her company. I also obtained permission to come again from Kerselec and visit her after my return. "Why," she said innocently, "I do not know what I should do if you never came back." And I, knowing that I had no right to awaken her with the sudden shock which the avowal of my own love would bring to her, sat silent, hardly daring to breathe. "You will come very often?" she asked. "Very often," I said. "Every day?" "Every day." "Oh," she sighed, "I am very happy. Come and see my ox." She rose and took my hand again with a childlike innocence of possession, and we walked through the garden and the fruit trees to a grassy lawn which was bordered by a brook. Over the lawn were scattered 15 or 20 stumps of trees, partially embedded in the grass, and upon all of these except 2 sat falcons. They were attached to the stumps by thongs, which were in turn fastened with steel rivets to their legs, just above the talons. A little stream of pure spring water flowed in a winding course within easy distance of each perch. The birds set up a clamor when the girl appeared, but she went from one to another, caressing some, taking others for an instant upon her wrist, or stooping to adjust their jesses. "Are they not pretty?" she said. "See, here is a falcon gentle. We call it ignoble, because it takes the quarry in direct chase. This is a blue falcon. In falconry we call it noble, because it rises over the quarry, and wheeling, drops upon it from above. This white bird is a gerfalcon from the north. It is also noble. Here is a merlin, and this tiercelet is a falcon heroner." I asked her how she had learned the old language of falconry. She did not remember, but thought her father must have taught it to her when she was very young. Then she led me away and showed me the young falcons still in the nest. "They are termed niais in falconry," she explained. "A branchier is the young bird which is just able to leave the nest and hop from branch to branch. A young bird which has not yet molted is called a source, and a muet is a hawk which has molted in captivity. When we catch a wild falcon which has changed its plumage, we term it a haggard. Raoul first taught me to dress a falcon. Shall I teach you how it is done?" She seated herself on the bank of the stream among the falcons, and I threw myself at her feet to listen. Then the Demoiselle d'Is held up one rosy-tipped finger and began very gravely. First one must catch the falcon." "I am caught," I answered. She laughed very prettily and told me my dressage would perhaps be difficult, as I was noble. "I am already tamed," I replied, "jest and belled." She laughed, delighted. "Oh, my brave falcon, then you will return at my call?" "I am yours," I answered gravely. She sat silent for a moment. Then the color heightened in her cheeks, and she held up her finger again, saying, "Listen, I wish to speak of falconry." "I listen, Countess Jean d'Is." But again she fell into the reverie, and her eyes seemed fixed on something beyond the summer clouds. "Philip," she said at last. "Jean," I whispered. "That is all. That is what I wished," she sighed. "Philip and Jean." She held her hand toward me, and I touched it with my lips. "Win me," she said, but this time it was the body and soul which spoke in unison. After a while she began again. "Let us speak of falconry." "Begin," I replied. "We have caught the falcon." Then Jean d'Is took my hand in both of hers, and told me how, with infinite patience, the young falcon was taught to perch upon the wrist, how little by little it became used to the belled jesses and the chaperon à cornet. "They must first have a good appetite," she said. "Then little by little I reduce their nourishment, which in falconry we call pâte. When, after many nights passed au bloc, as these birds are now, I prevail upon the haggard to stay quietly on the wrist. Then the bird is ready to be taught to come for its food. I fix the pâte to the end of a thong, or lure, and teach the bird to come to me as soon as I begin to whirl the cord in circles above my head. At first I drop the pâte when the falcon comes, and he eats the food on the ground. After a little he will learn to seize the lure in motion, as I whirl it around my head or drag it over the ground. After this it is easy to teach the falcon to strike at game, always remembering to faire courtoisie à l'oiseau, that is, to allow the bird to taste the quarry. A squeal from one of the falcons interrupted her, and she rose to adjust the longe, which had become whipped about the block. But the bird still flapped its wings and screamed. "What is the matter?" she said. "Philip, can you see?" I looked around, and at first saw nothing to cause the commotion, which was now heightened by the screams and flapping of all the birds. Then my eye fell upon the flat rock beside the stream from which the girl had risen. A gray serpent was moving slowly across the surface of the boulder, and the eye in its flat triangular head sparkled like jet. "A couleuvre," she said quietly. "It is harmless, is it not?" I asked. She pointed to the black V-shaped figure on the neck. "It is certain death," she said. "It is a viper." We watched the reptile moving slowly over the smooth rock to where the sunlight fell in a broad, warm patch. I started forward to examine it, but she clung to my arm, crying, "Don't, Philip, I am afraid." For me? For you, Philip. I love you. Then I took her in my arms and kissed her on the lips, but all I could say was, "Jean, Jean, Jean." And as she lay trembling on my breast, something struck my foot in the grass below, but I did not heed it. Then again something struck my ankle, and a sharp pain shot through me. I looked into the sweet face of Jean d'Ys and kissed her, and with all my strength lifted her in my arms and flung her from me. Then, bending, I tore the viper from my ankle and set my heel upon its head. I remember feeling weak and numb. I remember falling to the ground. Through my slowly glazing eyes I saw Jean's white face bending close to mine, and when the light in my eyes went out, I still felt her arms about my neck and her soft cheek against my drawn lips. When I opened my eyes, I looked around in terror. Jean was gone. I saw the stream and the flat rock. I saw the crushed viper in the grass beside me, but the hawks and blocks had disappeared. I sprang to my feet. The garden, the fruit trees, the drawbridge, and the walled court were gone. I stared stupidly at a heap of crumbling ruins, ivy-covered and grey, through which great trees had pushed their way. I crept forward, dragging my numbed foot, and as I moved, a falcon sailed from the treetops among the ruins, and soaring, mounting in narrowing circles, faded and vanished in the clouds above. "Jean, Jean!" I cried, but my voice died on my lips, and I fell to my knees among the weeds. And as God willed it, I, not knowing, had fallen kneeling before a crumbling shrine carved in stone for our Mother of Sorrows. I saw the sad face of the Virgin wrought in the cold stone. I saw the cross and thorns at her feet, and beneath it I read, "Pray for the soul of Demoiselle Jean d'Ys, who died in her youth for love of Philip, a stranger, A.D. 1573. But upon the icy slab lay a woman's glove, still warm and fragrant."
The end. Interesting story, that one. Not as scary as some of the earlier ones. But still fun. Didn't see that exact end coming, though. I liked that he had, enough hints that this was from a different time. That one didn't mention the King in Yellow, did it? Let's see. I should have time. I intended to do a second one. Let me see exactly how long it is. Wow. Next one's actually quite short. There. Nah, I probably shouldn't do two more, it being fairly late. Can I tell why it is yellow? I I don't think they did, or not yet at least, explain why the king in yellow appears in yellow. There. And it really hasn't explained that much about the king in yellow. I think I kind of like that. Then in different stories we just get to see little bits about, yeah, or referring to the entity itself, and then the eponymous play about the king in yellow. Wonder if though we'll really relate the Demoiselle d'Is back to the king in yellow. And now that I think about it, just realized there was a series of RPG games about a land called Is, or Is. I've heard it pronounced both ways, like YS. I know the third one was on the Sega Genesis, and there have been ones on several different systems. But I wonder if they took the name for that from the King in Yellow. Or if Robert W. Chambers got it from somewhere. Maybe it's a legitimate Breton name. Yeah, JRPG. I think so. I know the Genesis one was kind of a platform action RPG. And I've seen other people play it, but I heard some of the games in the series, but I don't know much about it or its history. Just, but if they don't share a common source, it's an interesting coincidence. On to the Prophet's Paradise. The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers. The Prophet's Paradise. If but the vine and love abjuring band are in the Prophet's paradise to stand, alack, I doubt the Prophet's paradise were empty as the hollow of one's hand. The Studio. He smiled, saying, "Seek her throughout the world." I said, "Why tell me of the world? My world is here, between these walls and the sheet of glass above, here among gilded flagons and dull jeweled arms, tarnished frames and canvases, black chests and high-backed chairs, quaintly carved and stained in blue and gold." "For whom do you wait?" he said, and I answered, "When she comes I shall know her." On my hearth a tongue of flame whispered secrets to the whitening ashes. In the street below I heard footsteps, a voice, and a song. "For whom then do you wait?" he said, and I answered, "I shall know her." Footsteps, a voice, and a song in the street below, and I knew the song, but neither the steps nor the voice. "Fool!" he cried, "the song is the same. The voice and the steps have but changed with years." On the hearth a tongue of flame whispered above the whitening ashes, "Wait no more. They have passed, the steps and voice in the street below." Then he smiled, saying, "For whom do you wait? Seek her throughout the world." I answered, "My world is here, between these walls and the sheet of glass above, here among gilded flagons and dull jeweled arms, tarnished frames and canvases, black chests and high-backed chairs,
quaintly carved and stained in blue and gold. The phantom. The phantom of the past would go no further. If it is true, she sighed, that you find in me a friend, let us turn back together. You will forget here under the summer sky. I held her close, pleading, caressing. I seized her, white with anger, but she resisted. If it is true, she sighed, that you find in me a friend, let us turn back together. The phantom of the past would go no further. The sacrifice. I went into a field of flowers, whose petals are whiter than snow, and whose hearts are pure gold. Far afield a woman cried, I have killed him I loved, and from a jar she poured blood upon the flowers, whose petals are whiter than snow, and whose hearts are pure gold. Far afield I followed, and on the jar I read 1,000 names, while from within the fresh blood bubbled to the brim. I have killed him I loved, she cried. The world's athirst, now let it drink. She passed, and far afield I watched her pouring blood upon the flowers, whose petals are whiter than snow, and whose hearts are pure gold. Destiny. I came to the bridge which few may pass. Pass, cried the keeper, but I laughed, saying, There is time, and he smiled and shut the gates. To the bridge which few may pass came young and old. All were refused. Idly I stood and counted them, until, wearied of their noise and lamentations, I came again to the bridge which few may pass. Those in the throng about the gates shrieked out, He comes too late! But laughing, I said, There is time. Pass, cried the keeper as I entered, then smiled and shut the gates. The throng. There, where the throng was thickest in the street, I stood with Pierrot. All eyes were turned on me. What are they laughing at? I asked, but he grinned, dusting the chalk from my black cloak. I cannot see. It must be something droll, perhaps an honest thief. All eyes were turned on me. He has robbed you of your purse, they laughed. My purse, I cried. Pierrot, help! It is a theft. They laughed. He has robbed you of your purse. Then Truth stepped out, holding a mirror. If he is an honest thief, cried Truth, Pierrot shall find him with this mirror. But he only grinned, dusting chalk from my black cloak. You see, he said, Truth is an honest thief. She brings you back your mirror. All eyes were turned on me. Arrest Truth, I cried, forgetting it was not a mirror but a purse I lost, standing with Pierrot there where the throng was thickest in the street. The jester. Was she fair? I asked, but he only chuckled, listening to the bells jingling on his cap. Stabbed, he tittered. Think of the long journey, the days of peril, the dreadful nights. Think how he wandered, for her sake, year after year, through hostile lands, yearning for kith and kin, yearning for her. Stabbed, he tittered, listening to the bells jingling on his cap. Was she fair? I asked, but he only snarled, muttering to the bells jingling on his cap. She kissed him at the gate, he tittered, but in the hall his brother's welcome touched his heart. Was she fair? I asked. Stabbed, he chuckled. Think of the long journey, the days of peril, the dreadful nights. Think how he wandered, for her sake, year after year through hostile lands, yearning for kith and kin, yearning for her. She kissed him at the gate, but in the hall his brother's welcome touched his heart. Was she fair? I asked, but he only snarled, listening to the bells jingling in his cap. The Green Room. The clown turned his powdered face to the mirror. If to be fair is to be beautiful, he said, who can compare with me in my white mask? Who can compare with him in his white mask? I asked of death beside me. Who can compare with me, said death, for I am paler still. You are very beautiful, sighed the clown, turning his powdered face from the mirror. The Love Test. If it is true that you love, said Love, then wait no longer. Give her these jewels, which would dishonor her, and so dishonor you in loving one dishonored. If it is true that you love, said Love, then wait no longer. I took the jewels and went to her, but she trod upon them, sobbing, Teach me to wait. I love you. Then wait, if it is true, said Love. The end. Well, that was a peculiar series of vignettes. More akin to, well, poetry, almost. A mixture of prose and poetry. I don't know what to make of that one. I'm trying to figure out if some of them did relate to the stories. I mean, it's certainly one about the pale face and death makes me think of the pallid mask. Yeah, like incredibly short. Like much shorter. God, I wonder if I should read one more. Yeah. I kind of thought, I thought the next one was also short, and then the remainder are long. Like long enough they would probably only do one per stream. I don't know, chat. I'm feeling not so exhausted quite yet. I think I'll read one more before we call it a night. Make for a very long title when I export this to YouTube. Hey, Dangerous Dave, welcome in. I'm doing alright, thanks. I had a decent week so far. How are you? What's this one called? Street of the Four Winds. Yeah, I think that's what I'll do. The next one will probably only take me 15 minutes. Yeah, hope your day is going well, Dangerous Dave. The last one, yeah.
No, this one actually will be the last story for tonight, because I think the one that follows is like 30 pages or something, and I sure as hell ain't doing that at this hour. Oh, glad to hear it, Dave. Yeah, we're just reading through more of The King in Yellow. And I'm horribly mangling some French. But in my defense, it's like 16th century French, apparently, so who would mangle it? Didn't come prepared for this. I didn't learn another language before reading this book. And it starts out with more French, just my luck. Alright, one more story, and then we'll call it a night. The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers. The Street of the Four Winds. Fermez tes yeux à demi, croise tes bras sur ton sein, et de ton cœur endormi, chasse à jamais toute dessein. Je chante la nature, les étoiles du soir, les lames du matin, les couchers du soleil à l'horizon lointain, le ciel qui parlait à cœur d'existence future. 1. The animal paused on the threshold, interrogative, alert, ready for flight if necessary. Severn laid down his palette and held out a hand of welcome. The cat remained motionless, her yellow eyes fastened upon Severn. "Puss," he said in his low, pleasant voice, "come in." The tip of her thin tail twitched uncertainly. "Come in," he said again. Apparently she found his voice reassuring, for she slowly settled upon all fours, her eyes still fastened upon him, her tail tucked under her gaunt flanks. He rose from his easel smiling. She eyed him quietly, and when he walked toward her, she watched him bend above her without a wince. Her eyes followed his hand until it touched her head. Then she uttered a ragged mew. It had long been Severn's custom to converse with animals, probably because he lived so much alone, and now he said, "What's the matter, Puss?" Her timid eyes sought his. "I understand," he said gently. "You shall have it at once." Then, moving quietly about, he busied himself with the duties of a host, rinsed a saucer, filled it with the rest of the milk from the bottle on the window-sill, and, kneeling down, crumbled a roll into the hollow of his hand. The creature rose and crept toward the saucer. With the handle of a palette knife, he stirred the crumbs and milk together, and stepped back as she thrust her nose into the mess. He watched her in silence. From time to time the saucer clinked upon the tiled floor as she reached for a morsel on the rim, and at last the bread was all gone, and her purple tongue travelled over every unlicked spot until the saucer shone like polished marble. Then she sat up, and coolly turning her back to him, began her ablutions. "Keep it up," said Severn, much interested. "You need it." She flattened one ear, but neither turned nor interrupted her toilet. As the grime was slowly removed, Severn observed that nature had intended her for a white cat.
Her fur had disappeared in patches, from disease or the chances of war. Her tail was bony and her spine sharp, but what charms she had were becoming apparent under vigorous licking, and he waited until she had finished before reopening the conversation. When at last she closed her eyes and folded her forepaws under her breast, he began again very gently. "Puss, tell me your troubles." At the sound of his voice she broke into a harsh rumbling, which he recognized as an attempt to purr. He bent over to rub her cheek, and she mewed again, an amiable, inquiring little mew, to which he replied, "Certainly, you are greatly improved, and when you recover your plumage, you will be a gorgeous bird." Much flattered, she stood up and marched around and around his legs, pushing her head between them and making pleased remarks, to which he responded with grave politeness. "Now, what sent you here?" he said. "Here into the street of the Four Winds, and up 5 flights to the very door where you would be welcome. What was it that prevented your meditated flight when I turned from my canvas to encounter your yellow eyes? Are you a Latin Quarter cat, as I am a Latin Quarter man? And why do you wear a rose-colored flowered garter buckled about your neck?" The cat had climbed into his lap, and now sat purring as he passed his hand over her thin coat. "Excuse me," he continued in lazy, soothing tones, harmonizing with her purring, "if I seem indelicate, but I cannot help musing on this rose-colored garter, flowered so quaintly and fastened with a silver clasp. For the clasp is silver. I can see the mint mark on the edge, as it is prescribed by the law of the French Republic. Now, why is this garter woven of rose silk and delicately embroidered? Why is this silken garter with its silver clasp about your famished throat? Am I indiscreet when I inquire if its owner is your owner? Is she some aged dame living in memory of youthful vanities, fond, doting on you, decorating you with her intimate personal attire? The circumference of the garter would suggest this, for your neck is thin, and the garter fits you. But then again, I noticed most things, that the garter is capable of becoming much enlarged. These small silver-rimmed eyelets, of which I count 5, are proof of that. And now I observe that the 5th eyelet is worn out, as though the tongue of the clasp were accustomed to fit there. That seems to argue a well-rounded form." The cat curled her toes in contentment. The street was very still outside. He murmured on, "Why should your mistress decorate you with an article most necessary to her at all times? Anyway, at most times. How did she come to slip this bit of silk and silver about your neck? Was it the caprice of a moment, when you, before you had lost your pristine plumpness, marched singing into her bedroom to bid her good morning? Of course, and she sat up among the pillows, her coiled hair tumbling to her shoulders, as you sprang upon the bed, purring, 'Good day, my lady. Oh, it is very easy to understand.'" He yawned, resting his head on the back of the chair. The cat still purred, tightening and relaxing her padded claws over his knee. "Shall I tell you all about her, cat? She is very beautiful, your mistress," he murmured drowsily, "and her hair is heavy as burnished gold. I could paint her, not on canvas, for I should need shades and tones and hues and dyes more splendid than the iris of a splendid rainbow. I could only paint her with closed eyes, for in dreams alone can such colors as I need be found. For her eyes I must have azure from skies untroubled by a cloud, the skies of dreamland. For her lips, roses from the palaces of slumberland, and for her brow, snowdrifts from mountains which tower in fantastic pinnacles to the moons. Oh, much higher than our moon here, the crystal moons of dreamland. She is very beautiful, your mistress. The words died on his lips, and his eyelids drooped. The cat, too, was asleep, her cheek turned upon her wasted flank, her paws relaxed and limp. 2. "It is fortunate," said Severn, sitting up and stretching, "that we have tidied over the dinner hour, for I have nothing to offer you for supper but what may be purchased with 1 silver franc. The cat on his knee rose, arched her back, yawned, and looked up at him. "What shall it be? A roast chicken with salad? No? Possibly you prefer beef? Of course, and I shall try an egg and some white bread. Now for the wines. Milk for you? Good. I shall take a little water, fresh from the wood," with a motion toward the bucket in the sink. He put on his hat and left the room. The cat followed to the door, and after he had closed it behind him, she settled down, smelling at the cracks, and cocking one ear at every creak from the crazy old building. The door below opened and shut. The cat looked serious, for a moment doubtful, and her ears flattened in nervous expectation. Presently she rose with a jerk of her tail and started on a noiseless tour of the studio. She sneezed at a pot of turpentine, hastily retreating to the table, which she presently mounted, and, having satisfied her curiosity concerning a roll of red modelling wax, returned to the door and sat down with her eyes on the crack over the threshold. Then she lifted her voice in a thin plaint. When Severn returned he looked grave, but the cat, joyous and demonstrative, marched around him, rubbing her gaunt body against his legs, driving her head enthusiastically into his hand, and purring until her voice mounted to a squeal. He placed a bit of meat, wrapped in brown paper, upon the table, and with a penknife cut it to shreds. The milk he took from a bottle which had served for medicine, and poured it into the saucer on the hearth. The cat crouched before it, purring and lapping at the same time. He cooked his egg and ate it with a slice of bread, watching her busy with the shredded meat, and when he had finished, and had filled and emptied a cup of water from the bucket in the sink, he sat down, taking her into his lap, where she at once curled up and began her toilet. He began to speak again, touching her caressingly at times by way of emphasis. "Cat, I have found out where your mistress lives. It is not very far away. It is here, under this same leaky roof, but in the north wing, which I had supposed was uninhabited. My janitor tells me this. By chance, he is almost sober this evening. The butcher on the Rue de Seine, where I bought your meat, knows you, and old Caban, the baker, identified you with needless sarcasm. They tell me hard tales of your mistress, which I shall not believe. They say she is idle and vain and pleasure-loving. They say she is harebrained and reckless. The little sculptor on the ground floor, who is buying rolls from old Cabane, spoke to me tonight for the first time, although we have always bowed to each other. He said she was very good and very beautiful. He has only seen her once and does not know her name. I thanked him. I don't know why I thanked him so warmly. Cabane said, "Into this cursed street of the 4 winds. The 4 winds blow all things evil." The sculptor looked confused. But when he went out with his rolls, he said to me, "I am sure, monsieur, that she is as good as she is beautiful." The cat had finished her toilet, and now, springing softly to the floor, went to the door and sniffed. He knelt beside her, and unclasping the garter, held it for a moment in his hands. After a while he said, "There is a name engraved upon the silver clasp beneath the buckle. It is a pretty name, Sylvia Elven. Sylvia is a woman's name. Elven is the name of a town. In Paris, in this quarter, above all, in this street of the 4 winds, names are worn and put away as the fashions change with the seasons. I know the little town of Elven, for there I met fate face to face, and fate was unkind. But do you know that in Elven fate had another name, and that name was Sylvia?" He replaced the garter and stood looking down at the cat crouched before the closed door. "The name of Elven has a charm for me. It tells me of meadows and clear rivers. The name of Sylvia troubles me like perfume from dead flowers." The cat mewed. "Yes, yes," he said soothingly. "I will take you back. Your Sylvia is not my Sylvia. The world is wide, and Elven is not unknown. Yet in the darkness and filth of poorer Paris, in the sad shadows of this ancient house, these names are very pleasant to me." He lifted her in his arms and strode through the silent corridors to the stairs, down 5 flights and into the moonlit court, past the little sculptor's den, and then again in at the gate of the north wing, and up the worm-eaten stairs he passed, until he came to a closed door. When he had stood knocking for a long time, something moved behind the door. It opened, and he went in. The room was dark. As he crossed the threshold, the cat sprang from his arms into the shadows. He listened, but heard nothing. The silence was oppressive, and he struck a match. At his elbow stood a table, and on the table a candle in a gilded candlestick. This he lighted, then looked around. The chamber was vast, the hangings heavy with embroidery. Over the fireplace towered a carved mantel, grey with the ashes of dead fires. In a recess by the deep-set windows stood a bed, from which the bedclothes, soft and fine as lace, trailed to the polished floor. He lifted the candle above his head. A handkerchief lay at his feet. It was faintly perfumed. He turned toward the windows. In front of them was a canapé, and over it were flung, pell-mell, a gown of silk, a heap of lace-like garments, white and delicate as spiders' meshes, long, crumpled gloves, and, on the floor beneath, the stockings, the little pointed shoes, and one garter of rosy silk, quaintly flowered and fitted with a silver clasp. Wondering, he stepped forward and drew the heavy curtains from the bed. For a moment the candle flared in his hand. Then his eyes met 2 other eyes, wide open, smiling, and the candle flame flashed over hair heavy as gold. She was pale, but not as white as he. Her eyes were untroubled as a child's, but he stared, trembling from head to foot, while the candle flickered in his hand. At last he whispered, "Sylvia, it is I." Again he said, "It is I." Then, knowing that she was dead, he kissed her on the mouth, and through the long watches of the night the cat purred on his knee, tightening and relaxing her padded claws until the sky paled above the street of the Four Winds.
The end. Interesting. His stories are... These last few stories are very different. I'm trying to think how they relate to the older ones. Wasn't there a Sylvia mentioned in one of the earlier ones? God, was it the yellow sign? Yeah, that was the one. He referred several times to a Sylvia he had met in Brittany. And the fifth story was set in Brittany. I'm wondering how these are all going to fit together in the end, and whether they are going to fit together. Also wondering when we're going to hear more about the King in Yellow. Well, I think that's enough. I would say cosmic horror for tonight, but I don't know that any of this really was cosmic horror tonight. Interesting. I should find somebody for us to raid. I don't know when. I'll try to do another bonus stream where I read more of The King in Yellow maybe sometime next week, because it's Thanksgiving week here in the States, and I don't know, I may end up working remotely a couple of the days before Thanksgiving. I don't know. But that's always nice, because I don't have the long bus ride to work and back home. And then as for my normal stream schedule, I stream Wednesdays and Sundays in the evenings, and Saturday in the late afternoon. And Wednesday will continue The Lost Crown, a ghost hunting adventure. Saturday, I haven't decided. I'll find some nice short horror game to terrify us. And then Sunday, I don't know, we may continue and try to finish Hardline. I got to the point where I'm kind of curious to see how it ends, but I'm also, if it keeps getting harder, I'm not sure if I'll actually be able to beat it. And then at some point, not sure when, we'll do the stream of games about beer, which we're going to do because of the successful community challenge. Alright, let's see who's online. Yeah, we could raid our friend Galara Dragon. Is she playing? Ah, she's crafting again, working on a massive pixel art mosaic. Should I try and find somebody who's doing something more horror themed? Let's raid Galara Dragon. Something with yellow. You know, actually, let me just see on a lark whether somebody's actually streaming the baby in yellow. It would be hilarious. Oh, yeah, my pleasure, Dangerous Dave. Thanks for coming by. Actually, quite a bit. Quite a number of people have been streaming the baby in yellow recently, but none are online now. Seems like. El Bebé Amarillo. People from all over the world are playing this game. No. Only past videos. Oops. I know. Well, it was a popular game. I think they said it had more than 1 million downloads. And I certainly enjoyed it. Yeah. So, thank you guys for coming by for the bonus stream. I know, like, I change up my schedule. I'm never sure how many people are going to wander through, or when I'm, reading as opposed to playing games. But it's always great to have you guys here, whether you're chatting or lurking, and so appreciate the raid and everybody who came in on that. You guys can follow me on Twitter and MySpace for stream announcements and polls and, I don't know, me plugging Hallmark shows and other random stuff. And you can find VODs of my past streams on YouTube. Yeah, I hope everybody has a good night. Hopefully see you guys here for the Lost Crown on Wednesday. Yeah, say hi to Galara Dragon, and don't go wandering the moors of Brittany by yourself. Also, like, don't get bitten by vipers and die. I feel like that's advice everybody should follow. Oh, Hairball! You're welcome. Have a good night.